This video is sponsored by ABC Leisure Group for everything to do with canal boats, marina moorings, hire boating, brokerage, chandleries and off-grid electrical equipment. This is what a newly restored section of a canal looks like. No, not the solar farm, the canal, running up the middle of your screen and veering off to the right. It may only be 1¼ miles long, but this freshly reopened section of the Montgomery Canal is a crucial step in extending its navigable length and brings it tantalisingly close to the border with Wales, just another 2 miles further along. Turn through 180 degrees and you see where the new section now ends, in a mooring basin at Crickheath. The water may end here, but the old canal bed remains, heading off under the bridge before veering right along the line of trees. The state of the Montgomery, or the Monty as it's known, is best seen on a map. To start with, this is the approximate path it takes from a junction with the existing Llangollen Canal, heading southwest down towards Newtown. In all, it's 33 miles long, and, rather oddly, 2 separate sections have been restored so far, which leaves the second one disconnected from the first and the rest of the canal network. It's the gap between those two that efforts are currently focused on closing, and the new section at Crickheath is part of that task.
It's wonderful to see canals restored because, of course, it adds to the greater network. It provides new amenity for new audiences of people, and it demonstrates the impact that canals can have on economies, on people's lives as we roll the restorations out along the canal corridor here and elsewhere. And fantastic to see it all come together and to celebrate what's been achieved on such a beautiful day.
A ceremonial ribbon had been strung across the canal, and a steam-powered boat ferried a collection of dignitaries here from the previous endpoint, to the strains of a new song written especially for the occasion by the Shropshire Boatmen.
Cruising down the Monty, cruising down the Monty. They said in 1944 that boats would go down there no more, but now it's opened up for sure.
Arriving at the wharf, the boat inched forward until scissors could be used to slice the ribbon and declare the canal reopened. Like all of Britain's canal restorations, the work's largely done by volunteers, with around 170 people chipping in some way, although specialist technical expertise was also paid for when needed.
There was no canal here at all. There was no remnants of the canal. There was some small earthworks. There was no towpaths. There's no walls. It was just an open piece of ground. In some areas it was relatively flat from side to side as well, so a lot of the earthworks had to be built completely fresh. We had a lot of issues with past settlement on the site as well, so we had to engineer a way of making the settlement happen quicker so that we could build the canal. So the guys here filled IBCs with water, and we overfilled all of the earthworks, and that pushed the ground down and consolidated the ground so that we could put the towpaths in. So it was quite a big engineering sort of collaboration piece for all of us to work together to make it work.
Speeches were made and, more importantly, a cake was cut by the oldest of the volunteers.
3, 2, 1, go!
There was also, inevitably, a plaque unveiling. Notice the mention of funding from the National Lottery, who are quite particular about what they'll support.
We want to be there to protect heritage. That's taking things from the past, helping for the future. We want to be there as well to protect the environment, and make sure that we have a natural element. The two can work together, just as you see on this wonderful project here, nature and built heritage coming together. We want to make sure people are involved, and I don't know if you can hear on the camera, but in the background they're singing away. So volunteers have done this project, definitely got people involved. And a final thing is it's got to be sustainable financially. So we want to make sure that the things we fund and the things we support today can be here for tomorrow. They're long-term projects. Get a mix of those right, and fantastic things, big and small, can happen across the country, including canals like this.
Canal boats are now free to come all the way down to Crickheath, But for the moment, the wharf and turning point are the end of the line. The bridge is the actual end point, where planks of wood sit across the canal, blocking the water from flooding out to the unrestored section. But beyond here, work is already well underway to excavate the canal. It's hard to appreciate, but this has already been substantially cleared of vegetation, and it's hoped the old clay lining underneath the mud and grass should be in good enough condition to hold water. A team of volunteers and some specialist contractors are currently working to restore a stone wall that lined that side of the canal. This was a busy industrial location once, as lime was brought from nearby kilns down to barges for transport across the country. Indeed, hidden in the trees is a raised section which once was a transshipment point where cargoes were loaded and unloaded.
Roughly where the gate is.
A tiny old stable is a reminder of times when horses pulled the working boats. It's easy to follow the old canal route. The towpath is now a walking trail. Just a few hundred yards along is a gate where a massive mound of clay will be moulded into a giant bung so the canal team can fill this section with water and check it really does hold. Given the obvious route, it might seem tempting to just run a JCB digger down here and have the whole thing ready in a day or so. But apparently there's wildlife to be moved first, newts and badgers and so on, which takes a bit of time. Let's go back to the map to illustrate what's next. The watered section connecting to the canal network now runs to Crickheath, as we've just seen. The other in-water section, the one that's isolated, starts at Arthleen and runs south through Welshpool. Joining these two sections is the goal. Rather oddly, there is another very tiny rewatered section in the middle of all this, at Llanmanech. It only runs for a few hundred yards, and there's even a trip boat and a visitors centre, which was sadly closed when I was there. The significant aspect here is that that bridge marks the border between England and Wales. You're looking at it from the English side, but the winding hole beyond and the rest of the canal into the distance is Welsh. It would therefore be a huge milestone to connect to here from Crickheath, because that would mean the Montgomery Canal in Wales would technically be reconnected to the network, even though there'd still be several miles to go to link up the big stretch of canal through Welshpool. This is the north end of that little section at Llanmanech. It just stops with an overflow pipe spilling any rainwater into the ditch that is the old canal route. As you head back up north towards Crickheath, that route is easy to spot alongside the road. And with it all very obvious, it should be plain sailing to restore, you'd think. But there's a fly in the ointment. Just half a mile south of Crickheath is Schoolhouse Bridge, where a road goes straight and level over the canal route, meaning there's no space left for the canal to run underneath it. So the road needs to be raised, meaning a new bridge.
The canal bridge was dropped in the 1960s. And what we see today is we think that the crown of the road behind us is just slightly lower than what was there before. And then the approach roads were raised to sort of form an embankment. But to get a navigation through, it's just too low. You just can't do it.
This is a blockage on the dry section of the canal in Shropshire. And before we started, we'd no idea how it was going to be tackled. It was way down on the list for the Canal and River Trust. It was a huge task to manage. It was absolutely nowhere on the list of priorities for Shropshire Council's Highway Authority. So what do enthusiasts do? They come and they step in and they get it on the way.
And that's why at the end of April, yet more dignitaries gathered here for the official first turning of the sod at the start of the bridge construction. Look, they're pretending to dig while press photographers take pics. The real diggers were waiting and raring to go.
We have to construct quite a complex foundation to the bridge, which to all intents and purposes is like a big shoebox. And the bridge itself is made up of segments of cast concrete blocks that, to use a very fancy word now, are joined on the extradus of the arch. So when you have an arch structure, you have the inside of it is the intrados and the outside is the extrados. And on that we have a membrane that joins all the blocks together, so they're cast and then joined together. So when you lift it up, it forms an arch. And then when you sit that on our shoebox and then put two precast concrete spandrel walls either side, which are all linked together, instant bridge. You're talking of a construction project that's approaching £1 million. So there's a lot of money going to be spent on this, and it is a major project. Not only have you got the bridge going in, you've also got the 4 retaining structures at each quadrant of the bridge, which come back into the canal structure, and then we'll restore the canal bed and then bury it again, so it's then ripe for restoration from Crickheath down towards Llanymynech.
It's a huge project, because building bridges is always a huge project, and you need a lot of technical expertise, you need all the engineering detail. Now, our retired volunteer engineers have been working through all that lot. I'm a retired lawyer. I was dealing at one stage with a dozen different solicitors who were dealing with some of the paperwork for the different aspects of the job, including, of course, the Highway Authority. We're standing on what was a public road until we shut the lane to traffic, and the Canal and River Trust, of course, because it's their canal, and we have to make sure things are done to the standards that are acceptable to both of them.
You might ask, what's the point? Why restore these old canals? Well, the canal should promote rural regeneration through tourism. It'll be a community resource and a new navigation for boaters. Plus, this canal is a designated site of special scientific interest and a special area of conservation.
You restore a canal because it's going to provide a leisure and recreation asset for the local community. The Montgomery Canal, derelict, sort of abandoned 80 years ago, has an amazing collection of canal age structures, the locks, the bridges, the weirs, the aqueducts, and it's got a very important wildlife ecology as well. Particularly in Wales, where it's got the highest standard of ecological designation, it really does mean that the canal is a project not for boaters, it's a project for everybody.
Canals are the most wonderful thing. They bring people together, they bring nature together, they span the country, and they last. They're part of our history and they're part of our future. And it's exactly what at the Heritage Fund we want to do. We want to take the great things from our past, natural and human, and support them so they're there for all of us for tomorrow.
Unlike some other restorations where the disused land went into private hands and has to be bought back in order to remake the canal, the Montgomery is already fully owned by the Canal and River Trust, and unlike some, there's also a sufficient water supply to feed it. A few years ago, I made a video along the isolated middle section through Welshpool, where a horse-drawn boat was giving an authentic old-time canal experience. It was a stunningly beautiful place to be, and when the whole canal is linked up and in water again, it will be an absolute joy for boaters, anglers and pedestrians. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.